This is The House That Wouldn't Forget, written by Coops.
Every town has one house that people cross the street to avoid. The paint flakes, the curtains never move, and even the birds don't rest on its roof. They say time moved on, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it lingers, waiting for someone to listen. This is that house, the house that wouldn't forget. Chapter 1. The House That Breathes. The taxi rolled to a stop at the edge of 2nd Street, its tires whispering over wet leaves that clung to the tarmac like old memories. Clara Maine leaned forward, pressing her palm against the cold window as the Borden House came into view. She had seen pictures online, of course. Angles sharpened by daylight, the neat white clapboards, the black shutters that gave it a doll's house charm. But here, under the bruised light of evening, the place looked nothing like the photographs. The shutters hung crooked. The windows were dark, reflective pools. The air itself seemed to thicken around it, like breath fogging on glass. She paid the driver and stepped out, her boots sinking into a patch of damp gravel. The smell of autumn, smoke, rain, and something faintly metallic hung in the air. Her camera bag knocked against her hip as she walked to the gate. The latch stuck, reluctant to open, as though the house were already making up its mind about her. Mr. Weldon met her at the door. "You're the one filming the Halloween thing?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. He looked as if he'd been part of the place forever, stooped, pale, a man weathered by years of tending to walls that whispered back. "That's me," Clara said. "Just a few shots for my channel. History, folklore, the usual." "Nothing usual about this house," he replied, pushing the door open with a creak that sounded too much like a groan. "Come in, then." The hallway smelled of wax and furniture polish, and beneath that an older scent, dust and something sweetly rancid like flowers long dead. The air was still. Even her footsteps seemed hesitant, muffled by the faded runner that stretched down the corridor. Family portraits lined the walls, each face blurred slightly by time and humidity, their eyes catching the weak light from the hall lamp. "Guests usually stay on the 2nd floor," Mr. Weldon said, leading her up the narrow staircase. "Room 4's yours. Try not to move anything around. Some folks like it kept as it was." "As it was when?" she asked. He paused on the landing. "When they stopped breathing." Clara gave a small laugh, half nervous, half polite. Weldon didn't smile. He handed her an old-fashioned key on a brass tag. "One more thing. Don't film after midnight." She raised a brow. "House rules?" he shrugged. "Let's call it experience. The place gets restless after that." When he left her alone, the silence felt deliberate, as though the walls had been waiting for him to go. Clara unpacked her equipment, the tripod, the handheld, the lapel mic, then set about filming her opening shots. She spoke softly, her voice echoing faintly through the room. "It's said this house remembers what happened here," she narrated. "That sometimes, if you listen long enough, it even breathes." The line felt good, haunting in just the right way. She reviewed the clip on her camera screen. Everything looked fine, though the light flickered oddly near the corner of the frame, as if a shadow had moved when it shouldn't have. She frowned, glanced toward the corner. Nothing there. Just the old dresser, its mirror veiled with a sheet of dust. When she began filming the upstairs corridor, she noticed the floorboards underfoot seemed to echo slightly behind her, half a second late, like footsteps matching her pace from another room. She stopped. So did the echo. She started again, slower this time. The sound followed, softer but precise. She turned suddenly, camera raised, only the length of hallway, the fading wallpaper, and a cracked window reflecting her own anxious face. By 11, she'd convinced herself it was nothing more than the old timber shifting with the weather. She sat cross-legged on the bed, editing clips, listening to the steady rain ticking against the window pane. Somewhere below, the grandfather clock chimed once, low and hollow. The house settled, its joints sighing, and then she heard it, a faint tapping beneath the floorboards. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 2 more. She held her breath. The sound stopped. She exhaled, trying to laugh it off. But when she shifted her weight, the knocking started again, perfectly in time with her heartbeat. She leaned over the edge of the bed, pressing her palm flat to the wooden floor. The boards felt cool, pulsing faintly under her skin, as if the house itself was breathing through the bones of its frame. For a long moment she stayed like that, her own pulse matching the rhythm below. Then, as quietly as it had begun, it stopped. A gust rattled the window. Her reflection in the glass shimmered and split like water disturbed by a stone. Behind her, just for an instant, she thought she saw another shape. Thin shoulders, a high-necked dress, the outline of someone standing too still. But when she turned, there was nothing except the steady swing of the curtains and the faint scent of dust and rosewater. She shut off the camera, but the silence didn't settle. It felt alive, watching. At midnight, the house exhaled. A soft creak in the rafters, a sigh in the walls, and the lamp flickered once, twice, before steadying. Clara lay down without undressing, the camera still on the nightstand beside her, its red light blinking like a heartbeat in the dark. Outside, rain washed through the gutters, whispering against the windows. Inside, the house held its breath. Chapter 2. Whispers Beneath the Wallpaper. Morning arrived without sunlight. The sky over Fall River was the colour of pewter, heavy with rain that hadn't yet fallen. Clara woke to the quiet throb of her camera's low battery alert, and the ache of a night spent half awake, listening to a house that refused to sleep. She swung her legs out of bed and felt the floorboard flex beneath her heel. It groaned, the sound oddly deliberate, as though the wood recognized her weight from the night before. She knelt, pressed her ear to the boards, and waited. Nothing. The air tasted of dust and varnish. She could hear only her own breathing. Mr. Weldon's voice startled her. "Breakfast's downstairs if you want it." He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His tone carried no welcome, but it wasn't unkind either, merely cautious, as though politeness might keep something fragile from breaking. "Thanks," Clara said. "I'll be down in a minute." When he left, she reached for her camera and replayed the previous night's footage. For a few moments there was only static and the soft, mechanical hum of the mic. Then in the upper hallway clip, she noticed something. A reflection in the mirror behind her, faint but there. A woman's face, half-turned, eyes downcast, the ghost of a smile frozen mid-breath. Clara froze the frame, zoomed in until the pixels blurred into soft greys. It wasn't her. The hairstyle, the collar, Victorian. She stared until the screen dimmed. The silence of the room grew thicker, like air that didn't want to be disturbed. Downstairs, the smell of coffee helped her reclaim a sense of normality. The kitchen was low-ceilinged, the kind of room that had seen centuries of small lives, meals prepared, gossip exchanged, prayers whispered. Mr. Weldon sat at the table with a newspaper folded neatly beside his plate. "Rough night?" he asked. "I heard tapping," she admitted. "Under the floor." He buttered his toast slowly. "The house settles. Old beams, hollow spaces, nothing more." "And the mirror upstairs? Has anyone mentioned?" He cut her off with a look. "You're here to film your program, Miss Maine, not to chase shadows. The house likes its quiet. Don't stir it up." She tried to smile. "You make it sound like it's alive." He didn't answer. After breakfast, she climbed the narrow staircase again. The air on the landing felt cooler, as if she'd stepped underground. She set the tripod in the hallway and adjusted the focus toward the old mirror, this time letting the camera run while she checked the walls. The wallpaper was a faded floral pattern, pale green turning yellow at the seams. She ran her fingertips along the edge, feeling where it lifted slightly near the skirting board. The paper peeled away with a dry whisper. Beneath it the plaster was uneven, marked with shallow scratches. Not random. Letters. She leaned closer. A.B. 1892. The initials looked carved with something sharp, maybe a hairpin or nail. The grooves were old, the edges dulled by time. Her pulse quickened. Andrew Borden, Abby Borden. Both murdered here. The camera clicked softly as it refocused. Clara turned, uneasy. "Mr. Weldon," she called down the stairs. "Did you know about this?" His reply floated back faintly. "The walls remember what the living forget." That was all. She stepped back, staring at the initials, the dust clinging to her fingers. The house seemed to draw a longer breath then, as if noticing she'd found something it meant to hide. A faint whisper rose, not from behind her, but from inside the wall itself. It sounded like air trapped in a cavity, yet there were words buried in it, syllables brushing against one another. She pressed her ear to the plaster. "Under, floor, forgive." She stumbled back, heart thudding. The whisper faded into the hum of the house. For a long moment she stood motionless, her pulse in her throat. Then she reached for the camera, stopped the recording and played the audio. Nothing. Just the creak of her shoes and the scratch of peeling paper. The voice, if it had been real, hadn't survived the lens. That night, the storm finally broke. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 small fists. Thunder rolled somewhere deep beyond the river. Clara sat by the window, watching lightning paint the room in brief flashes of white. Between strikes, the shadows seemed to move. At 11:30, she lay down, forcing herself to close her eyes. The whisper came again, soft, almost human. She opened her eyes to darkness. The sound drifted from the corner near the mirror, the same measured cadence as before, neither language nor song, but something between the two. "Mr. Weldon?" she whispered. No answer. The whispering grew clearer, now shaping itself into faint words. "Help me, beneath." The lamp flickered once and the whisper stopped. Clara waited, her breath shallow, listening for the rain. But the house had gone completely still. She turned toward the window. On the inside of the glass, written in the fog of her own breath, were 3 words traced by an unseen hand. "She still watches." The letters began to fade, swallowed by the cold. Clara sat upright, trembling, the echo of that phrase looping in her mind until dawn bled grey through the curtains. She never remembered falling asleep. Only the sense that somewhere between the ticking of the clock and the whisper of the rain, the house had whispered back. Chapter 3. The Tunnel Below. By afternoon the rain had eased, leaving the world rinsed and grey. A cold wind drifted through the half-open window, carrying the smell of wet leaves and chimney smoke. Clara sat at the foot of the bed, the morning's message still vivid in her mind. She still watches. She'd wiped it away, of course, but the words had left a faint residue on the glass, a shadow of condensation that refused to clear. The camera had captured nothing. The files from last night were grainy, the audio swallowed by static. It was as if the house itself decided what was allowed to be remembered. When Mr. Weldon brought her tea, she asked quietly, "Did anyone ever live here after the murders?" He hesitated in the doorway, the steam from the cup curling between them like smoke. A few tried. None for long. "Because it's haunted? Because the house listens," he said, and set the cup down without meeting her eye. After he left, she filmed a few transition shots, staircases, door frames, the view from the upstairs landing, anything that might give her edit a backbone of normality. Yet nothing looked quite right on playback. Every frame leaned a degree off-centre, as if the house itself was slanting toward her. By late afternoon, she found herself drawn to the basement. The door to it was narrow, half hidden behind a curtain of hanging coats. She switched on her phone's torch and stepped down into the smell of damp stone and iron. The light quivered against the low ceiling, throwing long shadows along the beams. The basement floor was uneven, a patchwork of cracked concrete and older bricks. Rusted tools hung from nails, jars of nails and bolts lined the shelves in dusty ranks. It was ordinary, too ordinary. And yet beneath the hum of the dehumidifier she heard something else, a hollow resonance, like an empty cavity beneath her feet. She crouched, rapped her knuckles against the floor. The echo came back soft but distinct, wood over void. She moved her hand along the line until her fingers found a seam, a faint rectangular outline filled with grit, a hatch. Her heart began to beat faster. "No way," she whispered to herself, brushing dust aside. The handle was gone, broken off long ago, but the edge yielded slightly when she pried at it with the corner of a crowbar left leaning against the wall. The wood groaned, reluctant, as though remembering pain. Then it lifted, just enough to let out a sigh of air that smelled of earth and something far older, faintly sweet, faintly rotten. She shone her torch into the gap. A short flight of brick steps led down into darkness. Moisture gleamed on the walls. She hesitated, thinking of Mr. Weldon's warning, "Don't stir it up." But curiosity was a kind of gravity, and she had already fallen too far. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough to turn around in. Her torchlight caught fragments half buried in the dirt. A button, a shard of china, what might have been a child's shoe sole, paper-thin and brittle with age. She kept filming as she moved forward, narrating softly out of habit, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "The records say the murders happened upstairs," she said. "But this feels older, like the house was built over something else." The air grew colder the deeper she went, until each breath fogged before her. The beam of her torch met the curve of a brick wall, the tunnel's abrupt end. On the wall, faint markings glimmered beneath a sheen of moisture. She wiped them clean with her sleeve. They were shapes, not letters, circles within circles connected by straight lines like spokes on a wheel. Beneath them lay a fragment of fabric pressed into the dirt, ivory lace, rimmed with a thin brown stain. When she touched it, a vibration ran through the ground, gentle at first, then sharper, as if something on the other side of the wall had noticed. The air trembled with a low knocking sound. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. Exactly the same rhythm she'd heard beneath her floor the first night. She stumbled back, the camera wobbling in her hand, light spilling across the damp bricks. "Hello?" she called before she could stop herself. "Is someone there?" The knocking stopped. Then, faintly, from the other side of the wall, came a noise that didn't belong in the earth, the lilting hum of a tune. A woman's voice, soft and broken, singing an old hymn she couldn't place. Clara felt her throat tighten. "Who are you?" she whispered. The humming ended with a sigh that seemed to move through the tunnel like a current. Then silence. Only her own breathing remained, too loud, too fast. She backed away, the camera shaking. The hatch above looked impossibly far, the shaft of light from the basement nothing but a dim promise. As she climbed, the crowbar slipped and clattered against the brick, the sound echoing down the tunnel until it dissolved into something that almost resembled laughter. When she burst back into the basement, the air felt thinner, as if the room had exhaled. She slammed the hatch shut, pressed her weight against it until her heartbeat slowed. Mr. Weldon was standing at the top of the basement stairs. His face was pale, his hands clenched around the rail. "You shouldn't have opened that," he said quietly. Clara swallowed hard. "There's a tunnel down there. Someone built it before the murders. There's something behind the wall." He shook his head slowly. "No, Miss Maine. There's someone in it. That's the problem." Chapter 4. The Second Verdict. Evening sank over Fall River like a bruise spreading through the sky. By the time Clara came back upstairs, the house felt different, as if her discovery had tilted its balance. The air was thicker, the corners darker, the silence alive in a way that made the hairs on her arms stand upright. Mr. Weldon hadn't spoken since they'd left the basement. He'd locked the hatch with a heavy iron clasp and pocketed the key, his movements stiff, deliberate, the way a priest might seal a crypt. At last he said, "You stirred the bones of it. You should pack up before nightfall." "I just need to understand," Clara replied. "That tunnel, what was it for?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "The Bordens weren't the first to build on this ground. There was a house here before theirs, burned down in 1847. Only the tunnel survived, a way for the servants to move unseen, to listen at doors, to fetch and carry without crossing the parlour floors. Secrets travel in straight lines down there. They don't forget." His words settled like dust in her mind. So someone could have been there. During the murders? "Could have," he said. "Might still be. This place doesn't know the difference between then and now." He left her alone after that, muttering that he wouldn't stay past dark. When the front door finally closed, the echo of it rolled through the hallway like a final warning. Clara sat on the bed, replaying her footage from the tunnel. The light flickered, static swallowing half the sound, until one frame froze mid-glitch. She leaned forward, adjusting the brightness. In the blur of movement, a hand appeared against the wall, small, pale, reaching out from the brickwork. She paused the video, heart thudding. For a moment the image seemed to pulse, as though reacting to her breath. Then the speakers crackled. A whisper slipped through the distortion. Not just noise this time, words. She wasn't alone. Clara stared, frozen. The voice was faint, female, threaded with static. She played it again. The phrase repeated, softer, stretched into a sigh. She wasn't alone. The implications rippled through her mind like cold water. Lizzie Borden. The trial, the verdict, the endless debate over guilt. What if the house itself held the answer? She opened her laptop, cross-referencing maps of Old Fall River with the blueprints of the Borden property. The tunnel's direction didn't line up with the main house at all. It veered northeast toward the riverbank, and directly beneath what had once been a stable yard. She grabbed her camera and jacket. The wind outside had picked up, dry leaves scraping across the path like whispers chasing one another. The yard was overgrown now, fenced with rusted wire. She followed the beam of her torch through the weeds until she reached a patch of sunken earth. Someone had filled it in long ago. The ground sagged slightly beneath her boot. When she kicked at it, the soil crumbled, revealing the outline of a rotted wooden frame. She brushed it clear, a trapdoor like the one in the basement, but half buried. Her fingers found the edge, cold and slick with mud. It wouldn't move. The hinges were welded by rust, the planks swollen with moisture. She sat back on her heels, breathing hard, when she heard it again. The humming. That same low hymn drifting through the soil, faint but steady as though rising from the hollow beneath her feet. She scrambled backward, heart pounding, the torch shaking in her hand. The sound faded as quickly as it began, leaving only the wind. Back inside, the house was darker than before. The lamps flickered in a strange rhythm, out of sync with the storm outside. She set her camera on the desk, pressing her palms against the cool wood to steady herself. The whisper came again, not from the tunnel, not from her imagination this time, but from the room itself, threading through the creak of floorboards. "Look in the mirror." She turned. The dresser mirror reflected the dim glow of her lamp, and behind her, for the briefest second, another figure. Not standing, but seated at the foot of the bed, head bowed as if in prayer. Clara spun around. The space was empty, only the bed sheets slightly indented as though someone had just risen and stepped aside. She lifted the camera, filming through the mirror. The air shimmered within the glass, the way heat bends a road. Shapes formed. 2 women, one older, one younger, both facing a third figure whose features dissolved before she could focus. Then static again, violent and bright. The lamp blew out with a pop. In the sudden darkness, her ears filled with the sound of breath, not hers, heavier, drawn close behind her shoulder. She turned sharply, camera still rolling. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" The answer came as a whisper pressed against her ear. To be heard. And then it was gone, the presence, the sound, everything. The house fell silent, every timber holding its breath. When the lights flickered back to life, the footage on her camera was gone. Every file erased except one, a single audio clip, time-stamped exactly midnight. She pressed play, at first only static. Then, beneath it, a voice, calm, measured, unmistakably male. The jury found her not guilty, but the house never did. Chapter 5. The Window at Dawn. The night was long and merciless. Wind raked the shutters, rain pressed against the panes, and the house groaned as if straining against its own memories. Clara sat on the floor of her room, back to the wall, the flicker of her dying lamp painting her in pulses of amber light. The laptop lay open beside her, looping that final recording, the calm male voice repeating its verdict again and again. The jury found her not guilty, but the house never did. Every time she replayed it, the pitch shifted slightly, as though the voice were drifting closer. By the 5th loop, she realized it wasn't coming from the laptop anymore. It was in the room. The air pressed down, thick and heavy. Somewhere in the hall, a door clicked open, slow and deliberate. Clara lifted her camera with trembling hands, pointing it toward the sound. The hallway was empty, yet the light spilling through the crack at the top of the stairs pulsed faintly, in rhythm with her heartbeat. Then she heard it again, the humming. Soft, steady, the same old hymn she'd heard in the tunnel. Only now it was joined by a second voice, deeper, answering in fragments. The duet drifted through the floorboards, up the stairwell, weaving through the creaks of the house until it filled every shadowed room. She moved toward the landing, her bare feet silent on the boards. The house seemed to breathe with her, inhaling when she did, exhaling when she stopped. The portraits on the walls looked darker now, the eyes less like paint and more like openings. Halfway down the stairs, she saw the front door standing ajar, rain glittering in the air beyond. She thought of Mr. Weldon's warning, "Don't film after midnight," and smiled bitterly at how late that advice had come. She turned back toward the parlour, drawn by the faint glow coming from within. Inside, the old mirror leaned against the far wall, uncovered, its silvered surface trembling as if touched by unseen fingers. The reflection showed the room as it was, and yet not as it was. The furniture stood in different places, the wallpaper new, the air filled with daylight. In the reflection, two women were speaking. One stood by the hearth, her hands red with something that wasn't paint. The other, younger, pale, frightened, clutched a handkerchief to her mouth. Their voices were faint but sharp with accusation. "You did it," said the younger. "I cleaned what was already done," the elder answered. "We both know who swung the axe." The younger turned toward the mirror, and for a split second her eyes met Clara's. Not through the reflection, but into it, as if she could see the watcher beyond the glass. Clara stumbled backward, the camera slipping from her grasp. The moment shattered. The image blinked away, leaving only her own pale face staring back. Behind her, the floor creaked. She spun, whispering, "Mr. Weldon?" But the figure standing in the doorway wasn't the caretaker. It was a woman in white, the same she'd glimpsed reflected in the window that first night. Her skin was colourless, her expression distant, eyes sunken as though carved from candle wax. She raised one hand and pointed toward the stairs. Clara followed her gaze. At the top of the staircase stood another figure, smaller, indistinct, holding something heavy in its grip. The woman in white spoke, her voice like wind through a crack in stone. "We remember what they forget." Then she was gone. The lights failed again, plunging the house into darkness. Clara groped for the camera, clutching it like a lifeline, the red record light blinking against her palm. She could hear movement above, slow, dragging footsteps crossing the landing. The air stank of iron and old wood. She ran for the front door, but it slammed shut before she reached it. The lock turned itself with a heavy click. Behind her the stairs groaned. Someone was coming down. She pressed herself against the wall, breathing hard, camera held up though there was nothing left to see. Lightning flashed through the window, and for one heartbeat she saw it clearly. A figure descending the stairs, face shadowed, an axe head glinting faintly in its hand. The flash faded, leaving only darkness and the sound of slow breathing, then silence. When morning came, the caretaker returned. The house stood quiet, calm, as though it had slept through the storm. The front door was open, drifting slightly in the wind. Clara's camera lay on the floor by the staircase, still recording. He called her name twice, then a third time. No answer, only the soft hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old clock. He sighed and bent to pick up the camera, ready to switch it off. But when he looked at the small screen, his breath caught. It showed the front of the house, the same view from the garden path. Early dawn, pale light spilling over wet leaves. In the upstairs window, framed by white lace curtains, stood a figure. A woman with Clara's hair, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on the lens as if she'd been waiting for someone to notice. Mr. Weldon closed the camera and set it gently on the sideboard. Then, with the resignation of a man long past disbelief, he whispered to the empty hall, "Welcome home, Miss Maine." The house creaked once in reply. A slow, drawn breath through the boards, and settled again, content.
This was The House That Wouldn't Forget, written by Coops.
If you've enjoyed this Halloween story, The House That Wouldn't Forget, please take a moment to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories from the darker corners of memory and imagination. Each week, new tales arrive here, stories that breathe, listen, and sometimes remember more than they should. You'll find the next in this Halloween series waiting on the playlist below, and if you'd like to revisit any of the others, you'll find them there too, each one with its own shadow to tell. Thank you for listening and for keeping the light on a little longer tonight. Until next time, sleep well and try not to listen too closely when the house settles.